Hello, everyone. Welcome to Let's Talk Books. This series is sponsored by the New York Writers Workshop, and the New York Writers Workshop is an alliance of published authors and professional writers of fiction, nonfiction, journalism, poetry, plays, and screenplays. It started in New York, but it has basically moved all around the globe, and we have teachers everywhere, and teachers who teach in just came back from Italy, not right before COVID. The mission is that we're dedicated to offering professional guidance, resources, and workshops that teach craft, foster creativity, and help writers achieve their goals. So thank you for being here. We have a really exciting night. We get to celebrate. So we have three awesome writers: Jennifer Stile, Celia Lasky, and Cooper Lee Bombardier. So what I would love is for you guys to just say, hello, I'm Jennifer Steele, so that everyone knows, and show your book so everyone gets it in their mind. Jennifer, can you start?
Okay, sure. I'm Jennifer Stile, and my new novel is Exile Music, which is the story of Jewish refugees in Bolivia during World War II, kind of an untold bit of the Jewish diaspora. So did you want me to start with the reading or just the hello?
Just show just the hello, and then we'll come back around. Celia, can you introduce yourself and show your book?
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Celia Lasky, and I'm the author of Under the Rainbow.
Cool.
It came out March 3rd.
Yay! Cooper.
Hi everybody, I'm Cooper Lee Bombardier. My book is Password Care. Just came out earlier this month from Daughter Press in New York, and it is a story of a trans life told through the process of becoming a writer.
Awesome, thank you. So you're gonna see the covers again at the end so that you can remember it in your mind and go and buy it. Okay. So our first reader tonight is Jennifer Stile. She's the author of Exile Music, which is forthcoming from Viking. Oh, wait, actually, it's not forthcoming. It came out May 5th, as well as The Woman Who Fell from the Sky and The Ambassador's Wife. So we'll be hearing from Jennifer first. Jennifer, would you mind reading? And before you read, just give us a sense of the book.
Okay, sure. So the book is about a family of Viennese musicians. The main character is a girl named Orly. Her father's a viola player with the Vienna Philharmonic, and her mother's an opera singer. And Orly's closest friend is a girl named Annalisa, with whom she's in love pretty much, but she's still very young at the beginning of the book. So I think it takes her a long time to realize what her feelings really are. This family in 1939, the only place they can get a visa is Bolivia. And so they are forced to flee Austria for Bolivia, where they have to recreate their entire lives. And my character, Orly, is mostly drawn to other girls and women. And music plays the main part of the book and things like that. So I thought I'd read two very short, like they're each about a page long, sections relating to the theme of this evening. So the first is just a short bit. It's towards the beginning of the book when Orly, that's my main character, she's around, I think she's really young in this scene. I think she's only 6. And she's at the opera for the first time with her mother, who's taken her to see Les Huguenots, light first opera. Okay. During the interval, I shook out my stiff legs as we walked to the lobby bar. My mother ordered me an Apfelspritz and herself a glass of champagne. I looked longingly at the cakes, but my mother said we could go to a cafe afterward. As she was paying, a woman with long glittering earrings and a spiraling tower of fair hair touched her elbow. Julia, I thought it was you. My mother turned to greet the woman, introducing her as a singer she knew from work. But I failed to catch her name. I was distracted by another woman. Was it a woman? Just behind her, Dressed in what looked like a man's tuxedo, she had combed her short, dark hair straight back. Instead of tipping her weight into one hip or wobbling on heels, she stood with her legs a foot apart, comfortable, like a man. When she saw me staring, she smiled. "I'm Odian," she said, her voice warm and low as she offered me her hand. I took her dry fingers into my damp ones. "Are you a girl?" Odian laughed, but my mother reached for my elbow and pinched it. "Orly, that's not polite. Odian, please forgive my daughter." She turned back to me. "Odian is a pianist and a composer." "Pleased to meet you." I curtsied, hoping it might make up for my rudeness. I didn't know that girls could dress like that. I didn't know that women could stand that way. The bell chimed while we were still drinking, and we had to finish quickly before the lights went down. I wanted to follow Odian back to her seat, but she and the blonde woman quickly disappeared into the throng. "Muti, how do you know her?" "I told you, from work. She's a mezzo." "No, Odian." "Ah." My mother glanced down at the program in her lap. "She lives with Ilsa." "They're sisters?" "More like roommates, I think." I thought about this. I wondered if Annalisa and I could be roommates. "Why does she dress like that? Odian, I mean." "Some women like to wear trousers. Even the First Lady in the United States sometimes wears trousers. And Marlene Dietrich, the film star. Though I don't recommend you start. Frau Fessler would not approve." "Do you think Odian wears trousers all the time? Are there girls who do that?" My mother took my hand. "Erdnus, you'll find a bit later in life that there are all kinds of girls." And then okay. The second bit is the girls are separated in school because they're spending too much time together. The following year, the school gave up keeping us apart. "You'd think you're Iantha and Iphis, you two," my mother said, half exasperated, half amused. It was entertaining to imagine myself as Iphis, a girl brought up disguised as a boy. Her father had sworn to kill her at birth if she wasn't a boy, so her mother had kept her sex a secret. I thought of all the freedoms that granted Iphis. She could wear trousers and walk the streets alone like my brother Willie, like Odian. I wondered if people on the street made fun of Odian for the way she dressed, or if they just thought she was a boy and left her alone. When Iphis was very young, she became close to another girl named Ianthe. Like Annalisa and me, they were always together. They studied together and played together and, I like to think, invented worlds together. Eventually, they fell in love. When they became betrothed, Iphis's mother Telethusa panicked. What would happen on the wedding night when Ianthe realized her love was a woman? She wept in despair, praying to the god Isis for rescue. And because two girls cannot be married, the night before the wedding, the gods took pity on Iphis and changed her into a boy. This ending had always bothered me. While I envied the freedom of boys, I didn't actually want to be one. I didn't want to become hairy and thick with a scratchy beard. I liked the smooth curves of my face. If Isis was so powerful, why couldn't she just make Ianthe happy that Iphis was a girl? Perhaps Ianthe had fallen in love with Iphis because she sensed her feminine nature and would be repulsed by her abrupt maleness and by the coarse hair sprouting on her face. Just as in so many fairy tales, we never got to find out what happened after that marriage. This was a serious flaw. Think of all the things that could go wrong with a marriage. What if you discovered you had married a man who had hit his own daughter?
Wonderful. Thank you. That was so sweet. Thank you. Yay. Everyone clapping. Thank you very much. We will talk more about that when we start the discussion. Our next reader is Cooper Lee Bombardier, and he is a queer trans-American writer and visual artist living in Canada. His writing appears in the Kenyan Review, the Malahat Review, Ninth Letter, Cutback, Nailed Magazine, Long Reads, Bomb, and The Rumpus, and in 13 anthologies, including the Lamba Literary Award-winning anthology, The Remedy Essays on Queer Health Issues. and the Lambda nominated anthology Meanwhile Elsewhere, Speculative Fiction from Transgender Writers, which won a 2018 American Library Association Stonewall Book Award. His memoir and essays, Pass with Care, is available now from Daughter Press. Everyone please welcome our reader, Cooper Lee Bombardier. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Christina. I'm going to just read a couple pages from a chapter called The Love That Remains. This is a memoir and essay, so I don't think I need to front load it at all. I'll just jump in. It starts with a quote. I always used to dream of the past, but like they say, yesterday never comes. Sometimes there's a song in my brain, and I feel that my heart knows the refrain. I guess it's just the music that brings on nostalgia for an age yet to come. And that's from the Buzzcocks song, Nostalgia. I listened to my friend Brooke talk about her obsession with the dyke culture of 1990s San Francisco, a scene I was part of. She was not. She wonders aloud if there's a word that describes a sense of nostalgia for a time in which you did not live. I say that I imagine this hypothetical word would have to be German with no direct English equivalent. I long to let her soak in the warm pool of memories that flood my hippocampus. That time was my queer coming of age, comparable to, perhaps to high school or college days for more well-adjusted normative folks. I smile and paste the layers of time together, imagine Brooke delirious and sweaty on the dance floor at Muff Dive, making out with other dykes in the dank, graffiti-brindled men's room where girls back their asses up to the urinals to piss. In our messy packs, weren't there always trans women back then, bellied up to the bar, hooking elbows with us in the pit at the shows as we skanked in the chaos? Gender was a wet paper bag we were all busy punching our way out of, so we could choose what we jumped back into. In this mad fold-in of my chronology, past and present, pressed toward each other to make a seamless picture, but on some days the misty glowing corona of memory fades, and in the harsh light of last call, I can't see the me nor Brooke of now, neither of us in that picture. I find one German word. It's close, but not quite right. And I'm probably going to mangle it. Sehnsucht, a German noun that denotes an intense longing or pining, a deep emotional state. Sometimes it's used to describe life's longings. Perhaps it encompasses something of our unfinished business, the repairs we never managed to make, the canvases leaning unfinished against a cinder block wall. My friend Brooke is a lesbian trans woman. She's 10 years younger than me and even younger in trans years. I love hanging out with her because she's smart and funny and alive. She's a smoke jumper who can parachute into the fire of any social situation, and she will meet it with the sheer power of her extroversion. She's game for just about anything. Despite the shitty stuff she's experienced in life, her compass always swivels to a magnetic north of positivity, and in that way, we are alike. We both relish the feast of tonight like survivors, like we might be dead tomorrow, because we both know that we might be. We both know that life is fleeting and ephemeral and filled with impossible brutality and loss, but also the most gorgeous, messy joys and phosphorant blazes of connection. So why not gather as many of those fragile branches of light to your breast as you can and try to build a nest? How can we make it so that you can see the body of all of your myths in the sky? Brooke has a stamina and enthusiasm for dating that is entertaining to listen to, and it leaves me a little breathless. Is that what I sounded like in the zenith of my dating prowess, I wonder? She often wants to talk about her lesbian identity like she's really fucking excited about it. I don't think I've ever had such conversations about being a dyke before, even when that's what I was perceived to be, even when that was the default identity. That felt better than anything else I could possibly conceive of for myself. Butch was in an apartment I could fit most of myself into and live happily for a while. But she is so happy to be a lesbian. I think if the politics around Mishfest hadn't been so messed up, she would have been over the moon there. That shit was made for a woman like Brooke. She belongs. I'll stop there.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Yay! Okay, our final reader is Celia Lasky. This is her debut novel, Under the Rainbow, and it's out with Riverhead Books. And her other work has appeared in Guernica, the Minnesota Review, Day One, and elsewhere. She's She has an MFA from the University of New Mexico and currently lives in Los Angeles with her wife and their dog, Whiskey. Everyone, please welcome Celia.
Thank you, Christina, for putting this together. And my book, Under the Rainbow, is about a queer task force that's sent into the most homophobic town in the nation. It's this town called Big Burr in Kansas, which is fictional, of course. And it's a novel in stories. So each chapter is written from the point of view of a different character. And some of them are task force members and some of them are townspeople. So you get sort of like a kaleidoscopic view of how this queer task force does. And I'm just going to make it simple, start at the very beginning of the book. And this chapter is told from Avery's point of view, who's a teenage girl, and her mom is the head of this task force that's come to Big Burr. I'm sitting in second period biology, where I should be diagramming a chain of DNA, but instead I'm diagramming something way more fascinating, the back of Jake Stromer's neck. The spot where his light brown hair meets his suntanned skin looks like a bird in flight, with two arches connecting in a V in the center. I imagine what it would be like to reach out and touch it, trailing my fingertips down to where his skin gradually pales at the rim of his gray, frayed t-shirt. I'd pull the shirt off with my teeth, I'd rip it right in half, then I'd kiss my way down his spine, stopping at each bony knob. When I get to the two dimples at the base of his back, my heteroshame hits. Heteroshame, noun, fear of coming out as heterosexual to your lesbian mom, who you know wishes you were a lesbian too. That's right. I'm a straight 15-year-old girl with moms who basically raised me like a dog show poodle to be the most perfect lesbian ever, with just the right amount of feminist theory and fall flannels and whale watching. Not that there's any whale watching here, and not that my moms are even together anymore. A few weeks ago, I moved from Los Angeles with my mom Karen and my brother Corey to Big Burr, Kansas, a charming little hamlet of 10,000 people that has definitively been labeled the most homophobic town in the US. Try not to be too jealous. The most homophobic thing is for real. This huge LGBTQ nonprofit called Acceptance Across America had a whole process for how they narrowed it down. They started by looking at which states had the most hate crimes and conversion therapy and all that fun stuff. Then they combed through people's social media and saw who was dumb enough to publicly say things like, I hate faggots, or choke on a dick, you dyke. Then, once they had a few front runners, they visited the towns incognito to see what was up. Big Burr was the clear winner. Finally, in an exciting experiment to see if bigots can be transformed into reasonable people, Acceptance Across America sent a task force to actually live in Big Burr, a task force that my mom promptly volunteered to be the head of, which brings me to how I found myself in this classroom. I'm pretty sure they're hoping the task force will work like that old MTV show, The Real World. Ooh. This is the true story of 15 queers and lefties picked to live in the most homophobic town in America, to work with its residents and find out what happens when people stop being polite and start getting real. And I'll cut it off there.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. That is, if like, I know that's fiction, but maybe, don't you wish it was not?
Some towns could use a task force for sure.
You know, people are going to be like, that's such a great idea. Let's do it. So we're celebrating LGBTQ month. It's almost gone. So thank the Lord we got a chance to do it. You know, without the parade and everything, it's kind of a weird year, you know. It's like it's every year and then suddenly it's not happening. But it's been quite the month. We originally had this scheduled for much earlier, but then with all the protests, we decided to postpone, and that's why we're doing it tonight. How do you feel in terms of your work? Do you feel that your work gets received by people more readily now than the past? Cooper?
Oh, I'm not sure. I've been kind of slowly chugging along, publishing things over the years. I do think there's more of an audience for trans writers now. A lot of the kind of the earlier stuff I was publishing was more, indie underground. This book is with a small indie press, which I'm delighted to be with because they've been amazing. But I hope that there's an ever expanding readership for trans writers, and I think the work that's been coming out and continues to come out from trans writers is just kind of unquantifiable. I mean, there's just so much amazing work coming out: poetry, scholarship, fiction, nonfiction. So, so we're here. We just need people to pick up the books and read them.
Yeah, it's an exciting time for sure, right? Jennifer?
Well, I'm not sure that people have, my books have been, the first one was about running a newspaper in Yemen, and the second one was about a kidnapping that started in the Middle East, and then this one. And while every single book has as its main character a bisexual person, I don't think people tend to think of them as in terms of the sexuality of their narrator. And I mean, I almost wish people would notice it a little more. It's often not even like, I don't actually, I'm not quite sure how I feel about it. I mean, it's interesting to me that I seem to be writing more and more overtly about sexuality as my books go along, because the book I'm writing now is like all lesbians, underground, revolutionary artist people. Whereas, my first book, it's just mentioned kind of on a sideline because it's a memoir, so it's about me. And then the next one's fiction, and my main character just was living with her girlfriend when she fell in love with a man. And then this one, Orly's probably more drawn to women than men because, it's not a 50-50 race, it's not like if you're bisexual, you're 50% attracted to men and 50% attracted to women. Like, people want to make it really mathematical, and that's just not how it works, No, but anyway. So, and then I don't know. Part of it is also I'm more and more interested in writing about women and less interested in writing about men is also part of it. But I'm not quite sure how readers think of it. Especially, this book is like, yeah, it's talked about as being a Holocaust novel or World War II novel or historical fiction, but no one ever says, hey, this is a bisexual novel or LGBTQ novel. But that's an important part of it.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Celia?
I mean, I feel like it's been about the last 2 years or so that LGBTQ authors have been able to break into like mainstream, what's considered mainstream now. So, I feel like the amount of queer books that I've been able to read over the past 2 years or so has just exploded. And it's been such an amazing feeling to just read queer books from all different kinds of people. And I'm like, oh, this must be how like cishet people feel when they read all the time, that they just can like have a breadth of experiences reflected back to them. And so I feel like if I had tried to publish my book, maybe like even before 2 or 3 years ago, I'm not sure if it would have sold. I feel like it was sort of the right time for a book like mine.
Galvanize that moment, this kind of movement.
Sorry?
What do you think started that movement? Like,
I wish I could pinpoint something. I don't know if Cooper or Jennifer have ideas about what sort of made queer writing finally break through a bit. And when I say break through, it's not like we're anywhere near the representation of the cishet writing, but there's much more options now. And yeah, I wish I could pinpoint what did that. And it's been very interesting with Pride Month just happening and being tagged in a lot of posts about like, this is the book, that I'm reading for Pride Month. And it's been great seeing that, but also a very interesting thing that I've noticed is so many people talk about my book as if it was almost like a textbook or something, you know, like I learned so much from this book, and oh, you know, and that's wonderful, but it's also like, yeah, but what did you just think of it like in terms of an art form or in terms of a book? You know, what did it do for you other than teaching you about some of these things, you know? And I think that's when we're really going to get to the next level of like queer representation, is when people can take our work as works of art and not something to be taught by, you know? And I think that that's like also something that I've seen a lot of Black authors talking about right now. Like, a lot of people want books that are very overtly about racism and to like teach them about the Black experience right now. But there are a lot of other, you know, things that make up a person's identity. And when we can get to that point when, you know, our work is viewed as just our work, that will be awesome.
Yeah, no, I hear you for sure. I think that is a frustrating thing when you're, you know, outside of like the white male kind of, you know, there's that very masculine kind of writing that when I was at grad school was considered the right way to write, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but so in terms of sexuality, like I have found sexuality to be such a tricky thing because I actually have sex in my book, and I think one reporter felt that it was a little bit lewd or something, and I was like, wow, like it just knocked me out because I was like, well, you know, here are all these men writing about sex. Like, and we don't hold them to any standard. And like, it was just weird. I wasn't expecting it. Maybe I should have expected it. I don't know. How do you feel about that?
I think that if you're someone from, you know, somewhere under the queer umbrella or trans umbrella, that it becomes weighted differently for you. Whereas, you know, like you said, the sort of, you know, white male canon, it's like can have as much sex or whatever, but it suddenly becomes somehow more insidious or seen as more subversive somehow if we have people who have sexuality in our work. You know, it's like we're human beings, we have sexuality, and I've experienced some kind of interesting things, like very well meaning, but like um, I sometimes work with youth. I do writers in the schools. When I lived in Portland, Oregon, I did that for years through literary arts. And, you know, when they were first talking about hiring me, I had somebody ask, you know, well, you know, there's a lot of sexuality and experimenting with drugs in your work. As if like I wouldn't know how to be appropriate working with teenagers around like what I talk about. Whereas I just don't feel like that kind of question would have been asked of
Oh, definitely not.
from a more mainstream or you know normative identity category, you know. And so I think there's that thing of like, you know, kind of what Celia was just talking about too, that you know, you don't get to have that sort of separation in terms of the art. You know, it's like it's all you, and you know, you end up speaking kind of for, or you're asked to speak for everybody of your identity, and you're like, wait, I just want to talk about the craft of this piece or this you know these formal concerns I was trying to get at, you know, and so I think that, you know, that's just my 2 cents on it. That I think that it somehow people kind of weight it differently for queer authors and people under the LGBTQ spectrum, and kind of can sort of try to turn it against us. And I'm like, that's dumb.
Yeah, you know, I think that probably happens to a lot of writers. How about you, Jennifer?
Yeah, I mean, I find it particularly, I mean, I feel like male writers in general can get away with sleeping with the entire planet and no one even comments on it in a review. Whereas a woman says, well, I've slept with just half the planet, they're like, you're a whore. You know, so it's just, I mean, even gay men are expected to sleep around more than women are in general, I think. You know, and so it's just not as okay for us, and we're always judged for it, and we're always, you know, found wanting if we haven't immediately settled into a monogamous relationship at, you know, a young age or something. And I, so I find that really frustrating because I feel like it's pretty impossible for a woman to be honest in a memoir about her sexuality, whatever that is, or honest about how many people she slept with or what it was like or the kind of crazy things she was into. Like, that's not acceptable. I mean, I actually had, part of this scene, there's not really any graphic sex in the book, but there is a sex scene toward the end that had one graphic part of it, which early readers, including my editor, like objected to. They were like, "Oh, that's icky," and I don't know. It just didn't strike them as I don't know, and it wasn't important enough for me to keep in, but because I didn't want to horrify people, it wasn't the book. But at the same time, I'm like, people like weird stuff, and that's
needed.
Yeah, and I mean, and the other thing, kind of, getting back to what Cooper and Celia were both saying about, it would be nice if we could just write about what we write about, and people not always thinking of it as being a textbook on what it is to be gay. It's like kind of getting beyond the kind of coming out as, the coming out memoir, and there's a book by Elaine Castillo, America is Not the Heart, and it's one of the first books I remember reading that just has a bisexual protagonist, and that word is never even used, and she makes no apologies. She sleeps with men, she sleeps with women, she never explains why. She just is, and she does a whole bunch of other things, and it's all about like Filipino revolutionaries and about people living in Oakland and hairstylists, and and I loved it. It was one of the most incredible books I've ever read. It was the most beautiful language, and
is she Filipino American?
Yeah, she's Filipina. Yeah.
In the Heart was a book written by Carlos Bulasan, and that's like one of the pillars of Asian American writing, because he talked about being in America and yet not belonging here. Not. So I guess that might be where she got the title.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, I actually don't know where she got the title, but I mean, I was obsessed with this book when I was reading it. Obsessed. Could barely speak to my family.
Celia.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, were you saying something, Cooper?
I just was asking what the title of that book was you were just speaking about, Jennifer.
America is Not the Heart by Elaine Castillo. And I'm not sure I'm pronouncing her name correctly, but so Elaine, I hope you'll forgive me if I'm not. You're great.
America, the Heart. Okay.
Yeah.
Christina, did you want me to also respond to this question? Yeah, I mean, I think it's a total double standard, the way that female sex and queer sex is reacted to by readers. I wasn't really expecting at all anyone to notice anything about my book in terms of that, but so many people have said that it was like too sexual for them, which, I didn't think I was including anything super graphic. There's just like a couple of super short sex scenes. One of my professors in my grad program was this older white cishet guy. He was in his 70s, I think, and he was teaching a class on publishing, and he didn't even know the difference between like a website and a blog. He called everything a blog. He was just, out of touch. And I turned in a story for his class, to go with a query letter, because that was like the assignment. And he was like, "This is gay pornography. Who do you think is going to publish this gay pornography?" And I was like, wow, okay. And I have this aunt who's pretty religious, and she said the book was just too sexual for her. She couldn't even get through it. And I just think, if you replaced the genders of, the people doing stuff in my book, people wouldn't blink an eye. So
yeah. It's maddening to me. I just like that whole feeling that you're writing and it's like you're going someplace where whoa, right? It's like, first of all, we should all be writing about sex because it's a natural part of our lives, right? Natural. Secondly, women don't even have a language for sexuality in literature. It's all written by men. Like So it's like, wouldn't it be nice if women actually did write? I mean, and then women wonder, why do men not get it? It's like, because they don't know. They have no idea, you know? But okay. So what are you doing this month to celebrate, by the way? Jennifer?
Geez. If I have to be honest, I haven't felt like celebrating anything. I mean, I'm thrilled about the Supreme Court ruling. That's fantastic. And I guess, you know, I do as much as I can on social media, but this is a pretty grim time for the planet, and I'm struggling to feel celebratory or optimistic. I mean, I'm sorry, I should be cheerier, but I just feel like I've been in a black hole, and yeah.
Yeah, I don't think you're alone.
Yeah.
Julia, how do you feel?
Sorry, me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say I'm sort of in the same boat, that I haven't felt super celebratory. I think I've just been mainly trying to do a lot of listening this month, you know, trying to listen to like a lot of Black queer voices, and sort of, you know, shift away from, you know, a very white centric idea of pride, and, you know, what a pride looks like that encompasses everyone. So I think if there is anything to celebrate, it's that, you know, the fact that we are trying to really encompass everyone with pride this year, even if we can't physically be together to do that. You know, I've noticed a lot of people sharing like updated versions of the pride flag, and like, you know, like that to me is good, and I'm happy to celebrate that.
Wonderful. How about you, Cooper?
Well, a lot of the official Pride events don't tend to happen here till later in the summer in Halifax. So I don't know how much of that stuff is actually going to happen this year. There was a vigil for Black trans lives last week that I went to. It was really beautiful, and this really wonderful speakers. They showed a film. And it was outdoors. There was a bunch of folks there. So I tried to show up for that, support that event. But yeah, I'm not feeling super celebratory in general. You know, with Celia, like trying to amplify and read and celebrate Black queer voices and Black trans voices. And yeah, I don't really know, like when the official Pride time kind of rolls around here, what that's going to look like. I have been encouraged by seeing sort of ad hoc celebrations through social media around the states where I'm from, that are outside of like the weird corporate thing that Pride celebrations have become.
Yeah.
And you know, when I'm in this smaller city, which is a lovely city, and there's a ton of you know, queer people and trans people here and supportive people. But last year, the Pride Parade was all like everybody who works for this bank wearing matching T-shirts that say Pride, and you know, and it's like, and I'm like, okay, and then it's like everybody who works for this chain of grocery stores wearing their little rainbow flag corporate T-shirts, and you know, and I had queer friends who were complaining about not being able to get the day off from work, you know, but even though they're like queer or trans, but all their straight allies, coworkers are marching, and so, you know, and while it's like, oh, I love that there's that desire to show up and support, but there's also that piece of me that's like the banks and all that, you know, I'm kind of like, so I've been a little bit encouraged by seeing sort of the a kind of pushback against that corporate kind of celebration.
Well,
And,
I think that was one of the reasons why they did not have it this year, right? So, so in terms of the craft, well, before we get there, have you been writing during this whole period that we've been home? Like some people are saying, like, oh, I'm home, so I'm writing all the time. Like totally spooks me. But maybe one of you guys. I mean, how are you guys doing? Celia?
Yeah, I had a very hard time more toward the beginning of the pandemic with writing. But the last few weeks, I've gotten into a good place where I'm working on revisions for my second novel before we hopefully send it out, and had gotten some good feedback to make the revisions with. So I feel like I'm finally in a place where I can sit down and at least have like a couple good writing days per week, whereas before that just wasn't happening at all. So I think you just have to sort of go with the ebb and flow of it. And at least for myself, I try not to feel too guilty on during the times or on the days where it's like not working.
How about you, Jennifer?
Yeah, I'm also working on through the second draft of my next book. And I'm writing it as part of my dissertation for a PhD. So actually I have deadlines I have to meet, or I'm not going to finish the program. But it's been pretty tough because my 10-year-old daughter and I were evacuated from our home in Uzbekistan in March, and we're in a temporary flat that is not ours. And
you are still there?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And we don't really have any imminent hope of getting home. So we're in a difficult situation. I don't know when we're going to see my husband again. So it's been a little hard to focus given that, and also the fact that I, until last week, was managing my daughter's online schooling as well, which was a nightmare. And also, we've both been kind of anxious and depressed, and so I want to kind of help her, but I'm not always very helpful. Is she more likely to help me because she's a far cheerier person than I am? I'm sounding like Little Miss Sunshine here today, but but I have been writing, so that's good. I mean, I've been writing not as much as I would like to be writing, and it happens in very small bursts as opposed to long sessions because I just don't really have long interrupted chunks of time.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if I were doing the first draft, it'd probably be harder. But now since I'm doing rewrites, at least there's something on the page I can fiddle with in between everything else. And I've written a few essays, to help publicize the book. And there's nothing about writing essays about the Holocaust to kind of keep you from feeling sorry for yourself. So, it's all lightness here.
Cooper, how about you?
Yeah, I've been writing a little bit. I teach and I edit, and so when I'm working on other things, I kind of have to work around that. And but I did pick up back on working on a memoir that I had started before this book, and I put aside for a little while. And a lot of it is around the height of the AIDS epidemic. And it seemed like just this kind of weird synchronicity in some ways to be stuck at home in a pandemic and to kind of revisit that time and get back into working on that book. So it's been chugging along, and I've started a couple essays that I haven't really gone anywhere with. And I feel just kind of lucky if I can do anything, like Jennifer was saying, of just like this sort of, pinging between anxiety, depression, and worry, and everything. I feel lucky if I get anything down on the page. But yeah, I am writing.
Yeah, I live in New York, and when it started, and I actually knew so many people who lost loved ones that it was so hard to even focus. Like my attention was like everywhere else. So it's nice to hear that you guys are not necessarily riding away like that, because I was getting spooked by that. However, someone has written in that you guys are really inspiring. So can you share something that is like an inspiring word that would help other writers out there?
A word, you said? A word?
No, it can be just something that is inspiring that you think will help others. Cooper?
Well, I told some of my students I teach through a low residency MFA program, and I just started with a new cohort of nonfiction writers. And they have sort of an assigned amount of work that they have to get into me by the beginning of December. And I did some math. Math is not my wheelhouse, but I did some math. I was like, we have approximately 25 weeks. They have to get 25,000 words total into me. And I was like, you could literally break that down Monday through Friday, 200 words a day, and you're golden. Like, you're at the maximum, right? So I think for me, like, thinking, how do you take something as overwhelming as writing a book and chunk that down into something that is a small goal that you can kind of work consistently with?
How many pages is 200 words?
200 words is probably a little bit less than a single page.
Okay, so you hear that? It's not even a full page. Okay, so you can do it if you're trying to do this. Okay, yeah. Cooper, do you have anything more to say?
Well, I was just gonna say, yeah, just kind of figure out what your goal is and try to figure out how to kind of reverse engineer just a little bit that you need to do every day to kind of get there, and that's gonna add up.
Okay, Jennifer.
Well, I guess the things I'm finding most inspirational at the moment are reading and knowing how many. I mean, there's so many incredible books that have come out just this spring. And every day I hear about 5 new books that I'm desperate to read. So that is inspirational, and reading other authors is inspirational, and hearing about other lives, and knowing that I'm not alone, and that there's other people thinking about the things I'm thinking about and concerned about the things I'm concerned about. So that helps. And this week I have an essay coming out about expressive writing and how it can help you cope with trauma. And I think when things are really just horrible, I often say, well, maybe it'll appear in something someday. And writing stuff, does help, and can become part of something you do later. So, I was kidnapped once in Yemen. That's an opening scene of one of my books. So there you go. It was useful in the end. But the process of writing was as useful as anything else. Just kind of sorting things out in your own brain. Even if you just tear it up after you write it, I think it's good for your psyche to put things on paper. Yeah.
Yeah. How about you, Celia?
I would say, in terms of inspiration, to just be your own biggest cheerleader and really try so hard not to give up, and there were just so many people who told me that my book would not be published, even in my grad program. My dissertation advisor was like, oh, maybe like a small university press will pick it up, but don't have any big ideas about what's going to happen with it. And everyone tells you, if you haven't been published in one of the top 10 lit mags, that you'll never get a book deal. And it's just, if I had listened to all of this prevailing wisdom around me, I wouldn't have tried to get my book published. And, I just sort of did it well, let's see, maybe it'll go one way, maybe it'll go another, but you have to try in order for something to happen. And there's no harm in trying. So why not give it a go?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think new writers often think oh, well, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write the great American novel, and and they put so much pressure on themselves that it becomes totally daunting, and then they feel like, forget it, I can't do it, But the great American novel, it depends on who you are, how you look at it, right? So. My idea of great American novel is not necessarily the same as someone else's, right? So just write your story. It's a story, just share it. Share the story. So if there is a heart to what you write about, I know you, Jennifer, you have 3 books, but how about in terms of the heart of your writing? You know how people often say, oh, the writer is examining these same issues. Do you have a heart to what you write about?
Yeah, I do. So a lot of my work involves that kind of in between places, like that space in between sexualities, in between countries, in between cultures. I left the US in 2006 and I haven't lived there since. My daughter's never lived there. And we're always moving from one culture to another, from one language to another. You know, and I'm interested in that space kind of around the, what do we call it, interstitial spaces. So kind of like between worlds. I feel like I have this more articulately in writing, but I'm very interested in kind of transcultural issues and people who live in countries not their own, whether through choice or because they have no choice. People who are forced to live places they might not choose to live. I'm kind of, my books have gone from voluntary exile to really involuntary exile. And they're kind of progressing in that direction. So, anyway, that's what interests me is people who, you know, are constantly in contact with other cultures and that space where you don't know what country you're from anymore or where you belong.
Actually, I think someone is responding to something you said before. She says 30 years of research shows that writing is therapeutic. It actually improves physical health as well. So that's good news.
Yeah.
I actually don't even keep a journal anymore. And I'm thinking after this COVID thing, I should really be keeping a journal because one day I feel okay. And then the next day I feel like it's the apocalypse. So it's just so weird and strange how my emotions vacillate back and forth. And one day I'm thinking, oh, I can deal with that problem. It's not a big deal. And the next day I'm like, I can't deal with it. Just cannot deal with it. Not now, you know? So, Cooper, how about you?
I think I'm interested in, you know, I liked what Jennifer was saying about interstitial sort of like liminal space, those kind of spaces in between, multivalence, so that sense of, you know, nothing is just one thing, nobody is just one thing. You know, you can kind of like pin something to an identity, but to me, that's always shifting. So yeah, I'm kind of interested in looking at that. That's sort of, I think my whole life, the kind of more I felt sort of pressured to be one thing, or, you know, I remember being young and getting into the punk scene and then, you know, finding like ways in which that scene felt so confining too, where like, oh, well, you can't hang out with that person because they're not punk enough or whatever. I'm like, how's that punk if you can't just hang out with whoever you want, whatever music you want, you know what I mean? So I think for me, there's I'm kind of interested in kind of pushing back against definition, you know, or feeling hemmed in by identity as much as I write about it.
Great. I love that. How about you, Celia?
Yeah, I mean, the really obvious thing is, you know, queerness. But I feel like just below that, something that I think about all the time, and it definitely has permeated my second book too, is the idea of societal expectations, you know, and who feels comfortable conforming to those and who doesn't. So, you know, sort of the idea of belonging or not belonging. But my wife's uncle one time coined the phrase "the ladder," which he talked about as, you know, you get married, you buy a house, you have kids, you remodel the bathroom, you know, like this ladder that a lot of society climbs. And oh, and I forgot to mention the wedding, you know, that accompanies the marriage. So I think about that a lot. And, you know, I think there are certain people that would do that even if society wasn't telling them to do it. But then I think there are people who are kind of only doing it because society is telling them to do it. So I think this idea of like societal expectations and how they shape us and how we either reject them or embrace them is something I just constantly think about.
Wow, that's great. I mean, I think one of the things that's so lovely is that you guys are all talking in ways about like these spaces that people don't wouldn't necessarily think to explore, right? But and you're talking about the unconventionality of life, like the possibility for it, right? I think now's actually a really great time to be doing that. Like, everything's up in the air, everything's a question mark. Life is a question mark. It's who knows, right? Like, nobody knows. So if what was I going to say? Just it flew out of my head. So what are your next projects? I know you, Jennifer and Celia, you're finishing up your second drafts of novels, yes?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. So it's like you get it to the agent and then they'll shop it. Yeah. That's very done. How about you, Jennifer?
Well, I mean, my agent has to like it before she'll shop it. There's no guarantees. I mean, I had a book that she didn't like and we didn't sell. So, just because I published my first one doesn't guarantee me I'll publish the next one, et cetera, et cetera. But I hope she'll like this one because it's really important to me. It's about a queer underground in a country much like Bolivia, if not Bolivia itself. I haven't quite decided. And I guess I was thinking about how the underground and the concept of an underground society is so often defined by maleness, and a lot of writers who have written about underground worlds have been men, and I wanted to imagine what an underground world would look like if it was defined by women and populated mostly by women, although there is a trans figure as well, and some other people. And it also deals with there's a white savior complex-y thing that happens, and there's art as revolution that happens, and a blazing inferno.
How about you, Cooper?
Like I mentioned, I've kind of gone back to a memoir that I got pretty far into, but it's I found it to be really emotionally taxing to work on, and so I think at that point I wasn't giving myself permission to feel overwhelmed and depressed by working on it. Even though I'm writing about events that happened decades ago, but and so it's that thing of like, how do you kind of wade through like your biggest failures and your biggest traumas and then make it a piece of art? No pressure. Right. So I've been going back to that book, and I am hoping to finish the first draft by the end of the summer.
So, in terms of your memoirs, Celia, do you write memoir as well?
I don't. Just fiction for now.
Okay, so I guess I'm going to ask Cooper and Jennifer. So, how do you know that your story is a memoir or fiction? How do people differentiate? Does it just happen, or do you start off doing something and just feel it out? How does that work?
Okay. No, in my case, it was simply because I moved to Yemen to become the editor-in-chief of a newspaper. And the experience that I had running this newspaper was so interesting, I wanted to write about that. And writing about that meant I had to write a memoir because I wanted it to be nonfiction. I wanted the world to know the Yemenis I worked with every single day. And I wanted them to stop thinking of Yemenis as terrorists and get to know them as human beings. And so it was that's why I wrote a memoir. But I have to say that I did find it deeply traumatic, not so much writing it for me, because I didn't reveal very much personally, but the tiny bits that I revealed of any sort of personal bit of my life were so relentlessly attacked by crazy people. And I had death threats, and that I just thought, that's it. I'm never writing anything true ever again about my life.
Wow. Can you give an example?
Oh, people would say Al-Qaeda should have killed you while they had the chance, or, just horrible, worse things. Like, they would use slurs and, there's a lot of crazy people on the internet. We all know that, right? So, that's what I wasn't prepared for about publishing a memoir, was like dealing with the hate mail, and you get hate mail. Like every memoirist I know, especially the women, maybe the men, get hate mail. And most of it's really violent and horrible. Yeah. And I was not prepared for that. it was not okay with me. I was also a new mother at the time, and I was in no state to be processing hate mail. So, I mean, maybe someday I'll write a memoir, but I am never telling the world the truth because I feel like they will use it against me. I still feel that way.
Wow, fear, huh?
Yeah.
How about you, Cooper?
You know, I at some point I guess I thought I was writing the book that I was just speaking about as fiction, and I kind of started out considering myself a self-taught writer. I didn't have any formal schooling in creative writing, and then I was in grad school and I took a forms of nonfiction class, or um, yeah, I think it was forms of nonfiction class with Tom Bissell, and he introduced me to a world of various of nonfiction writers that just completely blew my mind. And I was like, oh, this genre is weird, if not weirder than fiction. Like there's plenty of space to be weird and do all kinds of things in creative nonfiction. And I'm writing about my own experiences anyway. So but I do have some notes I've been writing for a novel, and a lot of it's based on true experiences, my own experiences, but I kind of feel like there's things that I could do and accomplish with that material as fiction that would be that I don't feel like I could do if I wrote it as my own story.
I mean, like you
even though
more readily can go there.
Yeah, and I think I can let it be layered in a different way than, you might use some of the same tools, but I think you kind of get at things differently when you're writing fiction versus writing memoir. So yeah,
I always find it bewildering that a writer sits at her desk or his desk for at least 2 years writing a book, and then it's like, really, we're not getting that much out of it. So you don't need to love it or anything, but right, it's like, what causes people to behave this way is so beyond me, right? So is there any last thing that you would like to mention, because we are over time? And I don't want to keep everyone. Thank you for coming. Could you please show your books one last time? And I hope everyone viewing this will please, please, please purchase their books. It's such a tough time right now. Exile Music, Under the Rainbow, and Pass with Care. Everyone, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it, and I hope you had a good time. And if you are interested in contacting these authors, they're on social media. You can get them. So
but don't hate mail us.
No, only inspiration and love. That's okay. Talk with you soon, and have a great night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christina.
Thank you.